for joining us today, or this evening, or this morning, wherever you happen to be calling in from. We're going to give everyone else about 5 more minutes, and then we'll get started. We'll be going for a full hour. So now would be a great time to grab some water or anything that you might need, a snack, maybe some breakfast or some dessert, and we'll kick things off shortly. Yes, Mike is encouraging coffee. Yeah, not a coffee. I'm more of a tea drinker myself, but coffee's good too. And as we give everyone else another 2 minutes, if you could test out our chat box this morning by typing in where you're calling from. Tunisia, Portugal, South Africa, Monterey, California, UK, the Netherlands, San Francisco, Jacksonville, Florida, San Juan Island, Madeira Island. We have a lot of people from California on. This is cool. Even cooler that you're calling not from California. Miramar Beach in Florida. Amazing. When you chat, if you can choose when it says to all panelists, or actually chat with all attendees and panelists, that would allow everyone to see where you're calling in from. Hong Kong, Nigeria, more people from Portugal. Very cool, very cool. Thank you for your patience. We have a few more people joining. We'll get started within a minute. Wonderful. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Ocean Learning Labs. We're here today by our guest, Mike Sutton, the current executive director for the Goldman Environmental Prize. We're also joined by young leaders and community members, mentors, supporters, partners from all over the world. As you see in our chat box, from Albania to Portugal to Belgium to the United States, Hong Kong. So thank you for joining. And I know the time isn't ideal for everyone, so we really appreciate you showing up this morning, evening, whatever it is for you. So today we're lucky to be joined by someone as illustrious as Mike, who's been quarantined and sheltered in place like the rest of us, but has still made time to talk with our community this morning. We'll have an incredible conversation with Mike, and he'll be discussing his far-ranging his career, offering some really important career advice on how to navigate the realms of ocean and environment as a young professional. And we'll discuss a bit about the qualities that it takes to be an effective leader and to drive social change. But first, I want to ground us in a bit into why we're here and who we are. So we are a network of young leaders in over 150 countries, many of which are represented on this call. And we're united by a common vision to restore and sustain the health of our ocean. We are growing and scaling this global movement here of people of all types, solutionists, whether you're an entrepreneur or a mentor, and you're creating these incredible solutions for the ocean. And within this community, we help serve that community by providing vehicles for collective action, whether that's hubs, which many of you are hub leaders. These are our organizing chapters around the world, through deep dive workshops and ocean learning labs such as these, on topics such as systems thinking and conscious leadership, circular economy, and more. Through project funding, many of you are aware that we have micro grant applications still open. If you'd like to apply, please do that by the end of today because they are due. We also offer innovation prizes, and if you are a part of a hub or looking to create a hub, there's funding available for your projects there as well. We'll be providing you with mentorship throughout the year, as well as virtual showcases and hopefully in-person summits if and when the world gets back to normal, which is hopefully a green-blue recovery version of normal. But in the meantime, we will be hosting more online virtual content such as these. And for those who have applied for the Ocean Youth Forum, the event that we're doing in conjunction with the United Nations and the governments of Portugal and Kenya, that has of course been delayed until further notice, but we will keep you posted as we learn more information. So I wanted to introduce Mike, and of course, after Mike speaks, we'll have ample time for Q&A. This is really designed to be interactive and for you to be getting the most out of this as you can as a leader yourself, right? Luckily, we have Mike to learn from. He's had extensive experience managing nonprofit organizations. He's influenced public policy on a large scale. He's been really a champion for Mother Earth in every way possible. He's worked at the World Wildlife Fund, the Packard Foundation, the National Park Service, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, the National Audubon Society, and he currently finds himself as the executive director of the Goldman Environmental Prize, which shares a similar mission to SOA in that they are, through the prize, are supporting great people doing vital work to protect the planet, to use Mike's words, and protecting the natural resources on which all of our lives depend. So I'm excited to, without further ado, introduce Mike, and thank you again for being here, and we look forward to having Q&A afterwards.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Good morning, everybody, or evening or afternoon. Hope everybody's staying safe and healthy and sane during the lockdown that we're all suffering from. If it's bedtime, your time, maybe this will help you sleep. But for the rest of you, we're going to talk about ocean leadership today. And I want to just do a brief introduction and then tell some stories, tell a few stories and show you how leadership works in practice and how you can achieve more than you think you can by working together. So let me just begin by sharing my screen here, if I can make that work, and we'll get started. So one of the things that I get asked a lot when I do media, when I do press work, is why should we care about oceans? What does it matter? You know, we live on the land, we live on the land surface, we don't live in the oceans. Oceans are out of sight, out of mind. When you talk to astronauts, however, they all come back from space with a different perspective than most of us, because they've seen the Earth from a different perspective. They've seen that this is a blue planet, not a green planet, that this planet is 70% ocean, only 30% land. So the majority of the planet is blue. The astronaut, the woman who just returned from the space station after a record-breaking stay, said exactly the same thing that all of her counterparts do. I came back with a new appreciation for the role of oceans in our planet. After all, not only 70% of the surface of the Earth, the estimate is that the oceans provide 90% of the biosphere, the living space on Earth. And they are almost certainly more diverse than what we see on land. We tend to think of rainforests as diverse, not compared to the ocean. They're also the lungs of the planet, of course. The statistic is that we should thank the oceans for every second breath we take because of the ocean's ability to absorb carbon dioxide and help produce oxygen. So the oceans are important. There's no doubt about it. You all know that already. You also know that the oceans are threatened. And some of the biggest threats to the ocean are things like pollution, runoff, coastal development, unsustainable fishing for decades and decades around the world. These are well-known threats. There is, however, one threat that stands out in the public eye. What is the one thing that the public thinks is the biggest threat to the ocean? Because it makes the front page of the newspapers and it makes CNN, and every time it happens, and that is oil spills. People think that the biggest threat to the ocean is oil spills. We just passed the 10th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon explosion and the biggest maritime oil spill in the world history in the Gulf of Mexico, just a little over 10 years ago. When the President of the United States goes to the Gulf to deal with an environmental crisis, you know it's a big deal. And people think that oil spills are the biggest threat to the ocean. Of course, we know, the scientists among us especially know that that is not the case. What is the biggest threat to the ocean? Scientists tell us it's not oil pollution, it's carbon pollution, otherwise known as climate change. We're already seeing the effect on our oceans of climate change. notably in the polar regions and beyond. The ocean is warming, the ocean is acidifying, and there are many implications of that for wildlife, for people. Increased storms are happening. This is the mega threat of our generation, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. The good news here, if there is any, is that people love the ocean. People, poll after poll after poll, and we do a lot of public opinion research in this business. Poll after poll shows that people love the coast. They like to recreate on the coast, the beaches, the oceans. They are very, very popular. People like to, what is the most popular show of the entire year on the Discovery Channel? It's A Bad Week to Be a Seal, Shark Week. Every year sets records for viewership. So people love the oceans. They have a curiosity about what lives there. And we can use that. Not only do they love the oceans, however, polling information suggests that they recognize the oceans are important to our economy. And this is all over the world. The estimates are the ocean economy is worth billions of dollars. Here in California alone, nearly $50 billion. And that's things like ports and port infrastructure, fisheries, tourism. Here in the Monterey Peninsula, where I live in the central California coast, Monterey used to be a fishing town, and not anymore. It's a tourist town now, and the tourist economy is very big, at least in a normal year. So the oceans are not only beloved, but they're really valuable as well to our economy. So it's a great time to think about becoming an ocean leader. And fortunately, there are more pathways available to you now than ever before. Let me go over a few of them, just a few of them. We'll start with the traditional paths to ocean leadership. One of them is science. You can get a master's degree or a PhD. Some of you on the call, including myself, have a science degree. And you can try to link science to decision making. One of the problems you run into very quickly, of course, is that politics often trumps science and law as the most important factor in decision making. But that doesn't mean science is irrelevant. Science is important to inform decision making and to make sure that decisions are actually going to work. So that's one path. As I say, I know many people who have done that effectively. Another pathway is to get a law degree. I have a law degree. You can work in government, you can work in nonprofit advocacy, you can work in a whole range of, a law degree is like learning first aid. It's nice to have. If you get arrested, it's helpful. If you get divorced, it's helpful. It's helpful in a variety of ways, but it's very helpful in conservation because so much of conservation proceeds by laws, treaties, and regulation at the national and international levels alike. One of the newer ways to demonstrate ocean leadership, however, is to get a business degree and work in the so-called blue economy. It's a relatively new term, but it means that as I said before, oceans are so important to our economy that there are lots of opportunities to work for a sustainable ocean economy, and hence the coining of the term blue economy. This may be one of the most powerful ways to weigh in on oceans of all. There are now lots of startups that are working on sustainable ocean industries. The advent, for example, of the cellular and plant-based seafood is a brand new innovation that is an example of this. SOA, Sustainable Ocean Alliance, operates a business accelerator every year for young entrepreneurs who are working in this sector. So this is a growing way to weigh in and to lead on the sustainability of oceans. Here at the Goldman Environmental Foundation, we see a lot of grassroots activism. The Goldman Prize, as Brandon alluded to earlier, is the Nobel Prize for the Environment. We award it every year to grassroots leaders and activists that have accomplished something significant, one on each of the 6 inhabited continents of the world. So there are 6 Goldman Prizes every year. If you're interested in seeing examples of grassroots leadership, go to goldmanprize.org and take a look. There are many Goldman Prize winners who have won the prize for their ocean leadership. So the good news is there are lots of ways to weigh in as an ocean leader, depending on where your passions and your interests lie. The key is to find the right fit for you. That word, that simple 3-letter word, fit, is one of the most important that I can convey to you, because that's your challenge, is to find the right fit for yourself. Where you work has got to be the right fit for both you and for the organization. Of course, these 4 pathways to leadership are not mutually exclusive. Often they work together and in concert. My best example of that is at World Wildlife Fund. We had about half the staff were scientists, the other half were lawyers. The scientists had credibility, but they didn't know what to do with it. The lawyers, of course, had no credibility, but they had the tactical knowledge. And so putting scientists and lawyers together is often a very important partnership. Increasingly, we're seeing business environment partnerships as well. And I'm going to give you an example of that in just a minute. In my own path, I entered a PhD program early on, only to discover by trial and error that research really wasn't my thing. I came back to the United States. I finished my graduate work in Australia, came back to the US, went to law school. That turned out to be a better fit for me, and the rest is history. Hopefully you are a little more self-aware than I was and won't have to do this by trial and error, but the key is to find the right fit for your own background. So let me share 3 success stories that illustrate how these leadership styles work together. And one of the best examples that we have here in the US on the West Coast is the creation of marine protected areas. This is a complicated term, of course. Here's an example of how complex it can get. The Florida Keys has, the whole Keys are a marine protected area, but there are different kinds of protected areas: national parks, marine sanctuaries, wildlife refuges, and so forth and so on. It doesn't really matter. The whole idea is to protect areas in the ocean as we do places on land. Here, the movement in the United States to create marine protected areas really was sparked by the scientific community. About 15 years ago, a group of almost 200 scientists got together, academic scientists got together and signed a consensus statement reflecting their belief that we need marine protected areas to safeguard our oceans, the health of ecosystems, and our ocean resources. And so that was a springboard that the advocates among us, the rest of us, could use to work to launch a campaign for marine protected areas. The concept is simple. If you protect an area of the ocean and you don't let people fish or drill for oil in it, the biodiversity tends to thrive, reflecting that ancient scientific principle that if you don't kill them, they tend to live longer and reproduce. So scientists told us what should have been really self-evident, that marine protected areas are good for the oceans and good for the economy, because they tend to be nursery areas for fisheries and so forth. We launched some polling of Californians to inform ourselves on what the public thought. And it turned out that the vast majority of Californians were in favor of creating new marine reserves off the coast, even if it means that some ocean areas be off limits to commercial recreational fishing. That vast public support led to political support for oceans, which was very important and is very important wherever you may work. California published its own ocean action strategy on the heels of a national ocean commission. And Governor Schwarzenegger at the time came to the California coast and pledged his support for ocean conservation. That was hugely important. On the heels of that, California started declaring marine reserves, first around the Channel Islands and off Santa Barbara in Southern California. Eventually, it took much longer than we thought, but of course it always does. California created the nation's largest network of marine reserves up and down the coast. The size and the spacing of these reserves was dictated by science. The initiative followed the science. And we ended up with protecting some of the most beautiful places in the world where the ocean meets the coast. Places like Point Lobos, Point Sur, Point Arena, and so forth. Places like Point Reyes here on the Northern California coast, where the land had been protected for many years as a national seashore, but there was no protection offshore until we created it And now we have what we called ridges to reefs conservation. So the seabirds that roost on Point Reyes have a place to feed that's also protected offshore. So when we got to Southern California, the issues got more controversial and complex because there are a lot of people in Southern California. The land is very populated. But as you can see in this shot, the offshore resources continue to be healthy, and we were able to create marine protected areas there, a complex network of protected areas throughout the Southern California coast. The whole idea was to protect about 20% of the coastal ocean, which is what the amount that scientists said is essential to protect the biodiversity and safeguard the health of those ocean ecosystems. And of course, this same story is playing out now all over the world. This is not a US phenomenon. This is a truly international campaign. Just a few years ago, only about 1% of the ocean, of the coastal ocean, was protected around the world. Now that has more than tripled. I think the current estimate is about 3.5% of our coastal oceans are protected, are strictly protected. There is a race to the top happening among nations to create the largest marine protected areas in the world, and that's a good thing. A race to the top is always better than a race to the bottom, which is what we often see in conservation. So that's one example of how science and advocacy worked closely together, along with a lot of really great community organizing. And if you look at the Goldman Prize website, you'll see a number of Goldman Prize winners that have worked to create marine protected areas in places like Haiti and Scotland and really all over the world. So that's the first story of how this works together. I want to turn to another story just briefly, and that is the story of the international effort to protect sharks, probably the most charismatic animal in the ocean. Here is, I know Alejandro Castillo is on. Alejandro will recognize this photo probably. It's a pregnant female white shark that has been killed in shark fisheries in Baja California. Killed almost certainly for its fins, but this is not an isolated example. Worldwide, many sharks are caught as bycatch in other fisheries. Here are blue sharks being caught in pelagic gill nets. The global mortality of sharks in fisheries is very high. Most of these are bycatch. They're not targeted by fisheries. However, there are increasingly targeted shark fisheries. Most of them are caught for their fins. The high value of shark fins is akin to the high value of elephant ivory. The one part of the animal is of disproportionate value. And that drives the practice of finning, where shark fins are cut off. The carcass is discarded because most sharks are not palatable and not edible. The meat is full of urea. And the shark fins are dried and then sold into international commerce, mostly to China and Hong Kong. The estimates range, but we think that tens of millions of sharks are killed each year for their fins. The fin trade is responsible for the mortality of literally millions of sharks around the world. And of course, ecologically, these are the lions and tigers of the ocean. They're some of the most important animals out there, the top of the food chain. And we've learned the hard way that if you tamper with the food chain, if you tamper with ecosystems by taking out the top predators, it's not a good thing. Bad things can happen. The shark fin, the demand for shark fin soup in Asia drives the fin trade, which drives the mortality of sharks. And so in California, we thought long and hard about, well, what could we do about that? We have here in California the largest Chinese population outside of Asia. And recognizing that, we thought, well, maybe it's time to make an example of this issue. So in 2011, we wrote a bill in California. Unusually, nonprofit organizations like the Monterey Bay Aquarium can sponsor legislation. So we sponsored a bill to outlaw the possession and sale of shark fins in the California legislature. We co-sponsored the bill along with a group of young Chinese activists who were committed to shark conservation. We had the bill was introduced by Paul Fong, a Chinese American legislator from Silicon Valley. and the battle was joined. We introduced our bill at a press conference at the California Academy of Sciences. The same day, the opposition launched its campaign to defeat the bill, led by State Senator Leland Yee. He held a press conference at a shark fin soup, a Chinese restaurant in San Francisco, served shark fin soup to all the journalists, and said our bill was racist because we were discriminating against Chinese tradition. So the battle was joined from the outset. Senator Yee, incidentally, was running for mayor of San Francisco at the time, leading to very interesting political cartoons, such as this one, where shark activists, Senator Yee didn't do his homework. He did not do public opinion research like we did. Our polling information suggested to us that the overwhelming majority of Californians supported shark conservation, including the overwhelming majority of Chinese Americans living in California. Senator Yee, however, was listening to the Chinese business community that didn't want to stop selling shark fin soup, and so he underestimated the support for shark conservation among his own constituents. He lost the race for mayor, was subsequently, and you can't make this up, Senator Yee was subsequently arrested by the ATF for federal arms trafficking and is now in federal prison, and so had a real fall from grace. Not necessarily because of his opposition to the shark bill, but nonetheless, advocacy here and grassroots activism was very important in bringing this bill across the finish line. Some of the activists even dressed up their dogs to look like sharks. Very effective in the Capitol because Governor Brown was a big dog person and loved that. And so eventually Governor Brown signed the shark bill, front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, above the fold, becoming one of the first West Coast states to ban the shark fin trade, which of course remained legal in other states, but not for long. Some of the other states, the West Coast and Hawaii and Guam, began to ban the trade because of the importance of the trade in the Pacific. Other states began to follow suit. Eventually, as more and more of states come on board, the federal government will probably be compelled to step in. But more importantly than that, campaigns by groups like Wild Aid began to work on the Chinese public, using celebrities like Yao Ming and Jackie Chan to make the point that that shark fin soup is not worth depopulating the oceans of sharks. And so the Chinese government banned the use of the serving of shark fin soup at all official functions. And a great deal of progress was made in the place where 90% of the trade happens. California accounts for only about 1 or 2% of the trade, but the Chinese government watches what we do in California because they know the very large population of Chinese here in California. And so we knew that what we did in California would encourage the Chinese to take action as well. So another success story, scientists studying the trade, activists working on getting legislation passed, very sophisticated advocacy happening, bringing this across the finish line, defeating an effort to sink the bill by playing the race card. Not easy to do. So lots to learn from that example. Let me finish up with another example of how ocean leadership can work. And this one involves business and investment more than anything else. For many decades, scientists were telling us that marine fisheries were being pursued, were being conducted in an unsustainable manner. Here's one example. A paper was published about a decade ago predicting that we're going to run out of wild-caught seafood within 50 years if current trends continue. And so this was an alarm bell for the conservation community and for governments alike. Here in California, just like everywhere that you look, the commercial fish landings were declining. And over a period of years, there were, 70, 80, 90% decline in both the amount of fish landed and the value of fish landed. And so we recognized that it was time to do something, and we weren't getting very far by asking the government to solve the problem. So we turned to market-based conservation, recognizing Paul Hawken's early point that the most powerful force to solve unsustainable use of natural resources may be commerce itself. And so we created the sustainable seafood movement to build market incentives and harness the power of consumer choice in favor of sustainable fisheries. You've all seen the statistics. We did, again, a lot of public opinion research. And the research that we conducted showed us that the most popular actions out there among the public are things that they can do themselves in their own lives to make a difference. So for example, recycling accounts for the popularity of recycling, avoiding products because of their environmental impact, purchasing products because they have a positive environmental attribute. Those are way more popular than things like contacting elected officials or even supporting environmental organizations, which the public doesn't think works very well. So there was a latent demand, a latent appetite for consumer action. And we put that to work in the sustainable seafood movement by launching consumer awareness programs like Seafood Watch at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Monterey Bay Aquarium partnered with hundreds of other zoos, aquariums, science centers, and businesses all over the world to release these seafood information guides. Here's an example, a very simple message: order off the best choice menu or the good alternatives menu and avoid the fisheries that are poorly managed. The whole idea was to create powerful incentives for fisheries to migrate from the red to the yellow to the green. And over time that has happened. The wallet guides, after about 100 million of those wallet guides are now on the streets. Many people carry them in their wallets, but with the advent of smartphones, it wasn't too difficult to put Seafood Watch on your smartphone. And now with the Seafood Watch app loaded on your smartphone, you can be a really boring dinner companion and tell all your friends what not to eat. And they will tell you to shut up because it's delicious, even if it's unsustainable. But most people want to do the right thing. And this information became very popular among seafood lovers all over the world. But it wasn't long then before not only seafood lovers and restaurateurs and chefs joined the party, but the big seafood buyers themselves. And this is where the power really lies. The press covered this about writing a seafood menu to save fish. The first eco-label was for fisheries was launched about the year 2000, the Marine Stewardship Council, and many of you are aware of this. This was a business environment partnership between World Wildlife Fund on one hand and Unilever Corporation. Unilever at the time is an Anglo-Dutch transnational. It was one of the largest seafood buyers in the world. It owned the biggest fish processing plant in the world in Bremerhaven, Germany, and fed about 25% of the seafood market in both Western Europe and North America. So Unilever was one of the world's biggest seafood buyers, teamed up with the world's largest conservation organization to launch the Marine Stewardship Council, the world's first eco-label for sustainable seafood. And it took a while, but the fishing and seafood industries embraced eco-labeling. Fishermen were proud of the fact that their fishery got certified as well-managed and sustainable. Of course, the certification of fisheries was controversial. It remains controversial to this day. But the point is, for the first time, we were able to harness the power of consumer choice and the power of commerce itself in favor of sustainable fishing. Here's what it looks like in the marketplace. About 15% of the world's seafood supply is now certified or in the pipeline to be certified. There are Australian rock lobster was one of the first fisheries certified. It's Australia's leading seafood export. And here it is in Migros, and it's a Swiss supermarket with bearing the eco label. So fisheries, seafood is a globalized industry. We wanted to use the power of that, of globalization to work in favor of conservation. This effort was criticized as neoliberal, which I had to look up the first time I heard the term. But not everybody likes market-based conservation, but if it is done right and you avoid greenwashing, it can be very powerful indeed. And here's what it looks like right here at home. I took this photo in my own Whole Foods in Monterey. On the left, farm salmon from Canada or Ecuador or Norway or somewhere like that, rather pallid color. Right next to, on the right, wild Alaska sockeye, the second most popular and most delicious wild salmon in the world, from well-managed sustainable fisheries, certified, bearing the eco label, indicating that that fishery has been certified. Not only does that mean that that seafood is better for the ocean, but in this case, it's better for you, since farm salmon have been shown to have far more contaminants than wild salmon. So just an example of how consumers had a choice for the first time in the marketplace, and were able to support sustainable fisheries with their wallets. But the real prize, as I suggested earlier, was not consumers, but was the big seafood buyers, the big retailers. Walmart, believe it or not, is the biggest grocery retailer in the United States, the biggest retailer worldwide, sells more groceries than anybody else. In 2007, they made a commitment to source only sustainable seafood. Aramark, one of the largest contract food service companies in the world, they service a lot of campuses and sports arenas and aquariums and zoos. They made a commitment to sustainable seafood. These are the big seafood buyers. Aramark buys over 10 million pounds of seafood a year. The choices that they make matter, because if it's not on the shelves and if it's not on the menu, you can't buy it. And so this was the ultimate prize. The real advantage, though, was that the demand from these big seafood buyers launched something called fishery improvement projects all over the world. Some of you may have worked with them. That was the missing link that connected the shift in the market with what happened on the water. And when fishery improvement projects started, I knew that this was going to work, because there was now an incentive and a mechanism for fisheries to improve their practices, become more ecologically friendly. And those are happening all over the world today. Today, the Marine Stewardship Council, based in London, is a $35 million a year nonprofit with revenue from logo licensing. Most of their revenue does not come from philanthropy. It comes from earned revenue off the sales of certified seafood products. So this is an example of a market-based conservation strategy where conservationists, environmentalists worked hand in glove with businesses, with big businesses, to launch something that was in both of their best interests. They had different motivations, always will, but they worked together to accomplish something very significant. And now I'll leave you with this one last thought about market-based conservation. Demand side strategies like Seafood Watch and the Marine Stewardship Council are important, but the real power is in supply side strategies. By that I mean the investment community, engaging the investment community in sustainability has been one of the most important developments of the last decade. So now with organizations like Fish 2.0, which was a business plan competition for sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, we're seeing more and more businesses focus on sustainability. 20 years ago, no one in the seafood industry knew the word sustainability, and no one was making those claims. Now, you go to a seafood show, everybody is making those claims. That's a big difference, and that triggered more and more investment in sustainability, and that is more powerful than anything we've seen before. So now, if you get an MBA and you want to work in sustainable ocean businesses, you can work for an investment company and invest in sustainability, which is very, very promising indeed. So just by way of summary, there are more opportunities than ever to be an ocean leader today. It's vital to pursue your passion, not to pursue something because you think you can get a job, but because you're genuinely interested in and committed to it. I would encourage you to look for and find unusual bedfellowships, unusual bedfellows, and form partnerships with them to accomplish more than any of you could accomplish by yourselves. We've seen that time and again. The most interesting legislative proposals are always bipartisan. The most interesting environmental initiatives are often business environment partnerships or public-private partnerships. I should mention that the Marine Life Protection Act that allowed us to create the largest network of marine reserves in the nation off the California coast was funded by a big public-private partnership. The state couldn't afford it by itself, so it turned to the private foundations to help, and the rest is history. So those partnerships, especially among unusual bedfellows, are very, very important and often very successful. Investors and startups are more interested in sustainability than ever. That is a very promising trend as well. World leaders are paying attention. The Sustainable Development Goals, one of them has to do with oceans. Again, world attention is turning more and more to the oceans than ever. So in summary, I am optimistic about the future. Coronavirus aside, I think our oceans we are better positioned than ever to save our oceans, despite the increasing pressure on them, because there are more opportunities than ever to lead. And I would urge you to take advantage of them. So Brandon, let me stop there, and we'll address any questions people may have.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mike. That was incredibly informative and inspiring. And hopefully you took something from that in the sense of how you can participate in this social change and this movement to heal the ocean. And a lot of you may identify as different types of leaders, whether you're more on the advocacy side of things or the grassroots side of things, or you identify as an entrepreneur. The beauty of this is we're all part of this movement, this community, to collaborate with one another and collaborate outside of the community. So thank you, Mike. That was amazing. And we'll get to some of these questions now that are in the Q&A here. So we can start at the top, and Mike, you might see this as well in the Q&A part. So feel free to take a stab. So we'll go through these. So the first question comes from Badis Karbul. And Badis is asking if MPAs can be replicated in other parts of the world, and if it's possible to mentor or advise on that process.
Sure. I mean,
regards to the southern part of the Mediterranean. Yeah.
Many of the examples I just used were from North America, not all, but lest anyone think this is these are northern strategies. The marine protected area, the campaign to create marine protected areas is truly global in nature. And if you look at many of the problems our oceans have experienced, they have not been seen as much in the South as in the North. The most spectacular failures in fishery management have not been in the South. They've been in northern developed countries that should know better and have better access to science and so forth. It didn't matter. The cod crisis of the 1990s in New England, for example, is a perfect example of where we had plenty of science, we had plenty of laws, but politics defeated law and science in that case and resulted in the collapse of major groundfish fisheries off New England. So when people ask me about, can we do this in the global South and the developing world, the answer is yes. In many cases, it's easier in the developing world because resources are generally in better shape. Not always the case. Certainly we've seen artisanal small-scale fisheries deplete, cause local depletion. But if you look at where fisheries have been certified all over the world, there are as many fisheries certified in developing countries as in the North. And now, as I mentioned before, there is a race to the top to create marine protected areas all over the world, especially in small island states. The 2018 Goldman Prize winner for islands was Jackie Evans from the Cook Islands, who helped to create, she conducted grassroots activism to create one of the world's largest marine protected areas that covers the entire EEZ of the Cook Islands. So all of the water is controlled by the Cook Islands. So there are many examples of that. And this is truly a global movement.
Beautiful. Yeah, and many of our community members and young leaders actually attended a webinar, an ocean learning lab, a few weeks ago with Jackie Evans. So she is a very respected leader in this space, and we got to learn from her a bit about seabed mining as well. Thank you for answering that question. Well, we'll get to the next one. We'll try to go through as many of these as we can. Antonio Paulo de Sousa asked or raised concerns essentially about the blue economy mirroring some of the mistakes seen in the green economy. And my understanding of or interpretation of his question is that it may take too much of a capitalist tilt and not enough credence is paid towards conservation.
Well, Antonio is right. The green revolution on land, where we moved from hunting to farming to feed the world, had huge environmental consequences. There's no doubt about it. The blue revolution, the same thing is happening in the oceans today, where we're moving from hunting or commercial fishing to farming or aquaculture. It's called the blue revolution. And our challenge with the blue revolution is to make sure that it doesn't have the same impact that the green revolution had on land. It is possible to farm fish in a sustainable manner. It's also possible to farm them in an unsustainable manner. We've seen examples of both. So the challenge is before us to make sure the blue revolution doesn't impact the oceans the way the green revolution impacted the land. The green revolution succeeded in feeding billions of people, but at the cost of huge environmental consequences that we're living with today. Now we have a chance to do it right in the oceans as we move from hunting or fishing to farming or aquaculture in the oceans. That is the challenge today. And I'm really glad to see many startups. If you look at the Fish 2.0 website, you'll see many of the startups that they have connected with investors are about sustainable aquaculture and sustainable fisheries. So hopefully, with any luck, entrepreneurship will help us avoid enormous negative environmental consequences from the blue revolution.
Thank you. We have many questions here. Let's see what else we can try and answer. Hayden Sloan asks if there are dive sites around protected areas and if dive tourists have a big impact, whether positive or negative.
Right. Well, you don't have to look very far to answer that question. Within some of the most popular dive sites on the California coast are within marine protected areas because of the abundance of wildlife. If you want to see lobsters in the Channel Islands off Southern California, you go to the marine protected areas, and it is amazing. The lobster fishery in Southern California is a very popular fishery. It's a trap fishery. It occurs outside marine protected areas. That means that the majority of live lobsters are found inside the protected areas, and they make very good dive sites. So generally speaking, marine protected areas are a real boon to dive tourism in wherever they occur. In Bonaire, scuba divers pay $25 to get into the Bonaire Marine Park, and they get a medallion that they attach to their scuba tank, their regulator. And that has become so popular that people buy them even though they haven't been there, just to show that they're an experienced diver. So yes, dive tourism is very, very popular, and marine protected areas really enhance that.
Thank you. So switching topics a bit, Era Laraswati from Indonesia is asking largely about the status of shark trade and finning within that country. And if you could speak to that and any advice on how they can have
so the trade in shark products like shark fins and shark fisheries is a moving target, if you will. That is to say, in different parts of the world, different regulations apply. Not all governments have outlawed the practice of shark finning, which is the cutting off of fins and the discarding of the carcass. The United States has outlawed shark finning in all U.S. waters. We still allow the import and export of shark fins, except in places like California and the other states that have outlawed it. I think there is a trend towards shutting down the trade in shark fins because it contributes to unsustainable fishing of sharks. The problem with sharks, as many of you know, is that their life history is almost more like a mammal than a fish. They have very low fecundity. They give live birth. And so a sustainable shark fishery is almost an oxymoron. Yes, we need to improve the management of shark fisheries around the world. They're not going to go away entirely, but shutting down and controlling the fin trade is part of the answer as well. And we're seeing more and more movement toward that as sharks get listed under CITES, the International Trade in Endangered Species Convention, one of the world's largest environmental treaties. I know Georgine Bradley was on before. She has championed the protection of sharks at CITES. We need more and more of that kind of work around the world. And truly, this is an international problem, shark conservation. You cannot solve it one country at a time. Yes, China and Hong Kong import most shark fins, so it is possible to target certain countries to make a big difference, but sharks occur in all waters, and therefore this is truly requires to solve the problem of the huge mortality of sharks and the decline of sharks worldwide. It requires international action.
Thank you. Sonia is asking about your experiences with the enforcement of MPAs. We've heard a lot about paper parks and the fact that some MPAs are just not being enforced at all. So curious about that.
Well, here's where we have some good news. I'm on the board of an organization called Global Conservation that's all about protecting national parks and other protected areas, globalconservation.org. One of the things that has happened in the last decade is we've deployed more and more and better technology, sometimes borrowed from the military, to provide adequate surveillance of very remote areas. So where it used to be possible to poach in a country's waters because they didn't have a Navy or a Coast Guard, now we have organizations like Global Fishing Watch, which harnesses satellite technology to monitor marine protected areas. They've been very helpful in places like Palau, which has only a couple of patrol boats. The satellites see where the problem is, and they vector the patrol boat in to do something about it. So enforcement is very important. You've got the Anthropocene Institute has created an M3 short-range radar system, and Global Conservation is deploying it around the world to provide rangers with the eyes to see beyond where they can ordinarily and monitor illegal fishing activity inside marine protected areas. So we are making progress. These have to be more than paper parks. And monitoring and enforcement is hugely important. Even here in California, there was a tendency to declare victory and go home after the big marine protected area network was established. But a couple of foundations said, no, you don't. We're going to continue funding monitoring and enforcement of protected areas to make sure that they're not just paper parks. So that's important wherever marine protected areas are declared.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, it's something we've seen too with our accelerator program and a lot of our projects, is that the tragedy of the common is actually being addressed through the deployment of these exponential technologies like artificial intelligence and autonomous vessels and satellite imagery. So it gives me some hope there, and Global Fishing Watch is a really good example. We had a question from an anonymous attendee about how to avoid greenwashing as it pertains to eco-labeling.
Yeah, it's a good question, and something that was certainly in the forefront of my mind from the beginning. You have to remember the definition of greenwashing is undeserved green publicity. If a company is doing the right thing and they are honestly making progress and they're serious about it, then it's not greenwashing. You can give them credit and publicity, and you should, because that's good for companies. When we partnered with Unilever to create the Marine Stewardship Council, my greenwash detector was on full game, because it was very predictable that companies sometimes want the green publicity, but they don't actually want to do anything serious about. One of the things Unilever did early on to show that it was serious was pledge to give up stop buying fish meal and oil from the North Sea until those small pelagic fisheries that generate fish meal and oil were under some form of management. And that created a huge tidal wave through the industry, because it showed that Unilever was serious, that this wasn't just greenwashing, that wasn't just a talking shop, as they say in the UK. And so you have to be very careful about choosing your dance partner carefully. If you're going to get involved with in a business environment partnership, you have to make sure the business is actually committed to environmental protection, not for the same reason you are. If you're an environmentalist, you care about ocean ecosystems, you care about wildlife, you want to protect them. Businesses tend to be self-interested. They care about their bottom line. Well, guess what? With Unilever, they were worried that overfishing was going to be really bad for their bottom line. So investing in an eco-label for fisheries was a good insurance policy for them. Their motivation was different than ours, but we wanted the same thing at the end of the day, and that was very powerful. Motivation matters less than what a company does, and that is what you should watch for in terms of avoiding greenwashing.
Very important point. Something I think we could talk about for a whole webinar. We are at time, everybody, so I want to be respectful of that, and if you do need to hop off, feel free to do that. Mike, would you be able to stay on for another minute or so and answer questions?
I have a staff meeting, but let's spend another 5 minutes before I have to jump off.
Okay, that would be fantastic. So Camila Vega is asking about how you started your talk, about how carbon is the biggest risk for the ocean, and asking what types of innovations you're seeing that address this now.
Right. So we all know that carbon pollution or climate change is the mega threat, the ultimate threat to our oceans. And it manifests itself in a number of ways. Obviously, sea levels are rising as polar ice caps melt. That's an issue that's going to inundate coastal places like San Francisco Bay and New Orleans and so forth. But more insidious is ocean acidification. As the ocean accumulates carbon dioxide, it becomes more acidic, which is really bad for a lot of things, especially if you're an oyster, you have a calcium carbonate shell that more acid water will dissolve. A friend of mine calls ocean acidification climate change's evil twin, and it's really true. We have to figure out how to innovate and find ways of reversing, of adapting to the inevitable consequences of climate change for the coastal zone while we mitigate the sources of carbon pollution around the world. Fortunately, there's a lot of attention being paid to climate adaptation in the coastal zone. I'll give you an example. The 9 Bay Area counties in San Francisco Bay Area, passed a ballot measure a couple of years ago to tax their citizens to raise billions of dollars for wetlands restoration and other projects that would help those places adapt to rising sea levels. There is an increasing focus on blue carbon projects like protecting mangroves so that they can help absorb some of the carbon that would otherwise go into the ocean. I'm not an expert on blue carbon, but I do sense the importance of this. We've focused early on the more easily solvable problems, the proximate causes of ocean degradation, like overfishing. We can solve overfishing tomorrow, today, if we have the political will and the knowledge to do it. It's going to take a lot longer to solve climate change and carbon pollution and its impact on the oceans, but that is the great challenge of our generation.
Thank you, Mike. And that'll have to be it for the questions. Thank you for your wonderful inquiries, and I wish we could have gotten to more, but Mike, you've been extraordinarily generous with your time, and I want to respect that you have another commitment. And thank you so much for this enlightening presentation and the inspiration this morning or evening or afternoon. And thank you all for coming to this episode of Ocean Learning Labs. We'll be doing more of these over the next few weeks and over the course of the year.
Well, thank you all for your leadership, and thanks Sustainable Ocean Alliance for organizing this.
Our pleasure, and thanks for being here with us. And from everyone here at SOA, have a lovely rest of your day and night, and we'll see you next time.